Tails' gameplay in Sonic Adventure 2 is weird. The closest you get to actually playing as Tails is in the Chao Garden, but honestly, I couldn't help but wonder what the game would be like if I could actually play as Tails without his mech. So, with the help of mods, let's do just that. We're going to play through all 15 hero action stages and all 8 bosses to see how much Tails can actually do on his own. Starting with City Escape, we're in for a treat. One thing we'll notice right away is that Tails is a good boy who doesn't destroy government property, and thus he can't use that chunk of a helicopter as a snowboard. You might have noticed that he's a little slow compared to Sonic. He also can't do any cool jumps off of these ramps, but Tails isn't beyond just a little bit of vehicular destruction as he effortlessly topples cars over. What's kind of neat is that you can actually play through most of this level the way that God intended, though you will need to get a little bit creative with wooden boxes as Tails actually can't break them with his big fluffy tails. Instead, we'll throw Omochao at these boxes in order to destroy them. Aside from getting bullied repeatedly by this beetle, things actually were surprisingly working out really well for me, and while I played this level I thought that, hey, this might not actually be that hard of a challenge. Sure, Tails can't grind, but he can do this kind of cute little flying thing right above the rails, and that's a win to me. However, our first road bump would show up right here. Typically, you'd be able to grab the handle of this pulley and it would pull you up. Tails, unfortunately, doesn't hit the gym, and he has a really weak upper body, so he just can't hold on to this for more than a fraction of a second. But, and this is going to be an ongoing trend, we can just fly around any obstacles that we see. Now, things have been going a little bit too smoothly, so let's change that. This is our first actual hurdle ahead of us. Tails cannot surpass this. You're meant to roll underneath this barricade, but like me, Tails cannot do a somersault. I thought that maybe I could fly backwards and then hop up and get enough height to fly over top of it. However, unfortunately, there's no way to get enough height as there's an invisible wall covering this ledge here, which meant that I was going to have to get creative if I wanted to reach that goal ring. After restarting the stage, I ended up kind of playing around and seeing if I could find a way to force Tails out of bounds, and to my surprise, there's actually a lot of invisible walls that extend way higher than Sonic could ever reach. However, I managed to find one place where you can get out of bounds just before you hit that trolley car at the end of the snowboarding segment. If you hit the jump ramp and make a right, you can actually get out of bounds right here, and this is pretty great because Tails in this game can fly indefinitely. Basically, you can go wherever you want. However, you can only decrease your elevation. There's no way to increase it, which means that you need to be a little bit careful when flying as there's no way to go up. On top of that, I had 2 issues. The first is that your camera for most of the time is locked when flying, and it seems to have a mind of its own. For example, sometimes the camera would just be stuck facing Tails, and that made it really hard to tell where I was going. The second issue is that level geometry here would just kind of pop in and out randomly sometimes, which made it hard to follow the stage. But through 20 minutes of trial and error and far more attempts than it should have taken me, I actually managed to successfully complete this run. I actually ended up realizing that you don't need to turn right to stay out of bounds here, and that you're actually just high enough at this point to fly wherever you want. You just don't want to get too low that you get stuck in level geometry again. Luckily, City Escape is a very downward descending vertical level, which makes it really easy to follow as you just need to gradually decrease your height. I had a little bit of issues here with level popping in and out like I had mentioned before, and that made it a bit hard to tell if I was going in the right direction, and sometimes I would end up a little bit confused. That's kind of what ended up killing a lot of my runs. Plus, the camera angle really wasn't the most ideal, but I mean, most of the time you could look down if you decreased elevation. So for the most part, it was actually smooth sailing, and it's actually pretty cool to get this bird's eye view of a level that I've played so many times growing up. I did accidentally almost fail as I undershot the end of the level, but luckily you can just clip in from underneath the road, and we ended up missing the part where the truck actually spawned in, so we had a pretty leisurely run down the hill. We even had the chance to turn around and say hi to Big briefly before continuing on with our adventure. So yeah, you can 100% make it to the goal ring. There's a little bit of cheese involved, but it's doable. Wild Canyon is next, and honestly, I really wasn't looking forward to it. Most people really dislike the mech stages in this game, but if I'm totally honest, the stages that I've always disliked the most are the treasure hunting stages. One thing that worried me is that a lot of these treasure hunting stages are made with verticality in mind. They kind of expect you to climb walls and then jump from way up high, and Tails kind of struggles with going up. Though I did actually get pretty lucky here. My first shard was in a pretty easy spot to locate. I managed to utilize the big geyser in the middle to shoot myself up, and then I just slowly flew my way down until I reached the ledge where the shard was found. Following this, I would actually completely and totally accidentally find the third shard without even trying, I'm just such a pro gamer that I have all the shard locations memorized, and I had absolutely no problem finding this shard. The last one proved to be a little bit tricky to get, but that wasn't because I couldn't find it, and instead it was mostly due to Tails' limitations. It turns out that it was inside of a wooden box, which, if you can remember, Tails can't break those. So I ended up getting a little bit of elevation, and I found my local box breaker. I picked him up, and the rest was history. Weirdly, Tails despawned after getting the last shard, and so it gave this really funny scene of Omochao just flying towards the camera. But yeah, other than that, Wild Canyon is not only beatable as Tails, but it's incredibly easy and it requires no cheese to do so. Honestly, as long as levels remain open, I don't see there being any kind of big issues. And, damn it. Okay, so Prison Lane, as far as I can tell, is not doable. I do think that there might be a way to do it, so with the help of Omochao, you can clear out all of the beetles in this room with you. Unfortunately, you can't defeat the one on the other side of the gate. I did try a lot of different approaches, but unfortunately, I didn't manage to get anywhere. The reason I think this is doable is because there were a good couple of times where I could pretty consistently get Omochao out of bounds by throwing him right here into the corner. Tails also glitches out when he stands in this corner, and so I feel like there might be something here because the level wasn't designed with a character as small as Tails, and so I'm thinking that maybe you can clip through geometry within the corners because Big Mech Tails would never be able to fit there. There are also these metal boxes that Tails can just hardly squeeze on top of, and I thought there might be something there. He acts a little bit funny around the boxes, but ultimately I just couldn't do anything with them. I also thought that maybe using this canister I could force myself out of bounds if I squeezed behind it. And this is actually where I felt like I got the absolute closest to be able to do this. There were a couple of times where I felt like I could really see Tails starting to push against the wall, but it was never enough to push myself out of bounds. So unfortunately, on stage 3, I have to say that Tails cannot beat Prison Lane. But let's not let that get us down, and let's see what other levels he can or cannot do. Our next level is the incorrectly spelled Metal Harbour. This stage is actually pretty easy and doable as Tails, as he can fly over any obstacle that would typically require Sonic to do that lightspeed dash. I did have to get a little bit creative right here, as I had to use this beam to get some extra height in order to make this leap over a canyon that normally we would just be able to follow rings with. Honestly, much like City Escape, you can play through a lot of this level without really needing to break the game in any way. Though I did need to get creative a second time, as Tails can't use the pulley behind this rolling spot. Surprisingly though, just to the side, there's this platform that you would never go to as Sonic, and this platform is fully walkable. You can just stand on it, and essentially you can use that platform just to fly over up ahead to the loop-de-loop found further into the level. The real issue comes in the shape of a rocket. As Sonic, you would need to make it at least halfway up the rocket, grab hold of a handle, and then the rocket launches you up in the air and you continue through the level. You have to do all of this under a timer, and that had me a little bit worried, as Tails might lack the speed needed to get there in time. Fortunately, you can actually get a head start by flying over, and with time you can make it to the middle of the rocket. Sadly though, the game crashes, and so, yeah, I guess it's time to push our creative minds a little bit more. Metal Harbour doesn't actually have any loading zones in it, which means that the entire stage is found within this map. So basically, as long as the part following the rocket isn't too high up, we should technically be able to fly through it and then clip through it. Now, to do this, I had to do a bit of blind flying, as the camera really didn't want to cooperate with me. But sure enough, I was right. After a little bit of flying around into the empty sea, I ended up flying into the end of the stage with basically no problem, and from there I was able to make it to the goal ring, making it totally beatable with a little side of cheese. Green Forest, for a similar reason as the rocket, also had me worried, as there's a timer here that you need to follow in order to beat the level. However, it actually started off pretty smoothly until I hit the spring and I realized that Tails cannot touch any of the vines in this level without crashing the game. I don't know what happened to my recording for this specific section here, but it did this weird picture-in-picture thing for the stage, so let me just fix that. Basically though, for this section, if you're just curious as to why it looks weird, it's because my recording decided to make itself weird. Now, it took me a sec to get through this level without touching any vines, and after a second failure where I ended up touching the vine after a little bit of cheese, I decided to give into the dark side, and right from the get-go, I just started flying over and around absolutely everything I could find. Like City Escape, it's actually pretty easy to figure out where you're going if you look down periodically, and you start off with plenty of height, which makes it pretty easy to find your way around, although I did get lost in a bunch of trees for a little bit right here. However, the rest of the level was just right next to me, which made it pretty easy to continue onwards. So otherwise, as long as you're willing to fly through absolutely everything and avoid vines like the plague, it's business as usual, and I was able to make it to the end, no problem. So quick little disclaimer before we start Pumpkin Hill. Pumpkin Hill is the stage where you get the ability to dig as Knuckles, which means that from here on out, emeralds can spawn underground. This would mean that they're impossible for Tails to get. However, every time you die, the emeralds change locations, and so you could just keep killing yourself until you get optimal emerald locations. I have a job and I have university classes to deal with, so I don't have time to murder Tails over and over again, which means that I'm going to be using a mod that basically just prevents emeralds from spawning underground. They still use their typical spawn locations, and so it's essentially just cutting out the middleman of killing Tails. Pumpkin Hill is surprisingly easy. I found the first emerald in a little house that I thought I would have to destroy with Omochao, but surprisingly Tails can just shatter this home like it's nothing with his mighty feet. Emerald number 2 required me to get a little bit of height and then slowly fly down to, but just like Emerald number 1, there was nothing too hard here. And then there was Emerald 3, which actually was just hanging out in a very open spot surrounded by some spooky trees. So, like the last Knuckles stage, Pumpkin Hill, totally doable, doesn't really require any cheese, just a little bit of modding so that I can save some sanity. Now, if Prison Lane was one of the most unbeatable levels, then Mission Street is the exact opposite when it comes to Tails Mech stages. With little to no issue, you can follow this level exactly as you would with Mech Tails. There were a few instances where I flew to save time, but the entire level can be done just as a platformer. The only real issue that you'll end up seeing is this part where you're supposed to use a pulley to reach these platforms, but you can actually get around this super easily. You just need to use these nearby boxes, stand on top of them, fly towards some pillars behind you, and then use those pillars to fly onto the platforms up ahead. So yeah, 100% beatable, and probably the easiest stage that wasn't a treasure hunting level up till this point. Speaking of treasure hunting levels, Aquatic Mine is next. The waters of Aquatic Mine are littered with the corpses of this poor fox after I finished. I hate Aquatic Mine. Tails can't swim, but he can fly underwater, which gives him a good deal of mobility. Shard 1 was found pretty quickly underneath a mine cart that Tails can't break. And actually, for the first time, Omochao isn't strong enough to help us here. But just by rubbing Tails' body against the minecart, I managed to just clip enough through to grab the shard. I struggled a lot with shards 2 and 3, which led me to drowning repeatedly. I died so much here and I was starting to lose my mind. Because sometimes you end up close to where the shard is and then you die and the shard respawns somewhere new, so you're just constantly searching. Now, I did accidentally stumble upon shard 3 while I was looking for shard 2. It was just sitting in the air here, and luckily I found it after hitting a spring, and it almost made the 7 minutes that I spent up until now worth it. I ended up dying some more as I hunted shard 2, only to realize that all I had to do was solve a quick puzzle, and after lowering the water, I found shard 2 no problem. I hate Aquatic Mine, I never want to return, but it is totally doable. Now I was riding off that high from Mission Street and hoped that Hidden Base would be an equally easy mech stage. I was wrong, and I would end up spending 35 minutes in the desert. You can fly through a lot of this level. You can even swing by Big the Cat and say hi to him, he's just chilling up here. My plan from the start here was to be as cheesy as possible. I figured I can just fly out of bounds from the start and get around absolutely everything. It's actually really easy to get out of bounds here. All you have to do is fly to the right and then you're behind the map. But fun fact about Tails, he refuses to let sand kill him. After drowning so many times, he no longer needs to breathe, which means that falling into the sand doesn't mean death. This means that if you fall into the sand, you just end up falling into darkness forever. So basically, you need to restart the game anytime you make a mistake. This made going out of bounds really annoying because I'm somebody who makes a good deal of mistakes. Fun fact about Hidden Base, there's a lot of upward verticality, which means that you can't just fly your way out of bounds and make it to the end of the level. So if you play the level regularly, there's one major issue pretty quickly into it, which is that you just cannot get enough height to continue the level right here. Thankfully, not too far away from here is a spring that absolutely launches you into the air. It's really easy to softlock yourself because there are plenty of walls that are designed with the Mech characters in mind, because only the Mech characters can destroy these walls. So I don't know if you can tell, but I'm starting to get a little bit frustrated. After many attempts, this is how you beat the level. The first portion can absolutely be trivialized by flying. You can avoid every enemy and basically all the platforms just by making a beeline up ahead. So the start is super easy, and I ended up finding this weird thing through trial and error, which I realized later is only applicable to this stage. If you grab a pulley while flying, you get absolutely propelled into the air. This is one of the only ways to gain vertical mobility in this level, and it is the way that will send you the absolute highest. And so, of course, we're going to be exploiting the absolute heck out of it. You just need to make sure that you don't accidentally bonk your head, and you'll be able to skyrocket with these pulleys. Next, you just need to fly alongside this building that you can't enter through conventional means due to a stone door that you're supposed to shoot down, and Tails just doesn't own a gun. You're going to clip through the side of the building, and then you're going to slowly descend onto this pulley. Try not to bonk your head and then get hit by a bomb like I did, but with that out of the way, you can grab the pulley and shoot yourself up. You'll want to land on top of this other pulley right here, and don't worry if you fall or if you get hit or whatever, you can use that pulley to climb yourself back up. Easy peasy. And what you essentially want to do is start flying at the pinnacle of your jump. If you do that, you can end up clipping through this wall, and it's really important that you do this on the leftmost pulley, and that when you clip through the wall, you move to the left so that you don't get stuck within the confines of the invisible walls that continue up ahead. From here, all you have to do is fly forward a little bit until you see these spinning cubes in the ground. You're going to want to move towards the spinning cubes, and before you know it, you'll end up magically in a new room surrounded by walls and enemies. You'll want to grab the pulley in the center and then hit the spring to your side. This is going to send you flying, and you'll need a second to orientate yourself. Now, don't get too distracted by the goal ring as it's too high to reach, and instead, you kind of need to fly aimlessly to your left until you find another room that just kind of pops in and out of existence. In this room, if you've flown in the right direction, you should show up right next to a spring. The spring will send you flying, and from there you can grab the goal ring. And there you have it. I absolutely lost my mind, and I spent nearly 40 minutes playing this stage, but you can totally beat it. However, you're going to be 100% constipated due to the amount of cheese required to complete this stage. Thankfully, the next level, Pyramid Cave, is much easier. I worried initially as Tails is a little slow in moving, even on an incline, and this level has a lot of timed sections. Not to mention, it's largely enclosed, which has not boded well for me in the past. Our first issue comes from a pulley. There's a spring that launches you directly into a pulley, and that basically makes this spring here useless, and yeah, of course, you can't use the pulley as you did in the previous level. It gives you a little bit of height, but it's nothing compared to what it was able to do before. Though I did get to watch Omochao get burned, and so that was kind of fun. So, time to restart the stage and get a little bit creative. Basically, at the start of the stage, you do it as you typically would. Once you hit the launch pad, you'll want to immediately start flying, and then use these archways to basically platform your way to the upper area. Now, from here, you can continue the level pretty much as Sonic would. I opted to fly a little bit more just to save on time, but it's all doable. Tails can actually even just barely get himself through this timed door right here, and the fact that he struggled with this door does not bode fantastically for the rest of the level. Collecting the keystones up ahead, totally doable. Tails can pick them up just like Sonic, no problem, and you can move on to the next section without needing to do anything too silly. It's here though that things get pretty interesting. Once you've recovered the second keystone, you're presented with this long hallway. You need to hit this timer and rush down a ramp to get to a door before it closes. On top of that, you need to do this without being hugged by ghosts along the way. I can't do this. I absolutely cannot do this. Someone might be able to do it, someone who is better than me, but I cannot get Tails down there in time. He is incredibly slow, and in almost all of my runs, I got grabbed by multiple ghosts because I just could not outspeed them. But we can still get to the goal ring. We just need to think a little outside of the box. So basically what you want to do is you restart the level, and like before, you're going to make your way up these arches, and then you're going to jump off of the left of the platform here. You'll fly down towards the final archway, and then you're going to want to work your way backwards towards the highest arch. From here, jump off and fly. That's basically it. You can clip through these big massive walls along the side, and Basically, you just want to follow down the hallway that you would typically need to race down. There's another hallway following this with a bunch of timers, but honestly, I didn't want to bother risking it. I mean, I'm already flying, so what's the point in giving myself another headache? Instead, just keep following the level. It's surprisingly easy to follow compared to the other levels, but from there, you'll end up making it to the goal ring. Easy peasy, all you have to do is land on it, and that's another level that is totally doable, although there is some unavoidable cheese. Death Chamber is impossible. I'm not sure what kind of magical powers I thought I possessed when I started this level, but there's nothing I can do here. There are metal boxes that you can't break, and there's areas where you need to dig to progress. Yeah, there's nothing I can do here. Unlike Prison Lane, I couldn't even find a spot where maybe I'd be able to clip and move ahead into the stage. 100% impossible, and even if I could clip, honestly, finding these keys I feel would just be a total nightmare. Now, in Eternal Engine, there's something that I wish I had noticed earlier. Tails can actually kill enemies by hitting them with his tails while he's flying. It's one of those things that I just completely stumbled upon. I thought I was going to take damage, but nope, I killed this beetle. Now, that would have saved many Omochao concussions, but oh well. The level, unfortunately, is not beatable. You'll find these springs which lead to a pulley, and you just cannot get enough height to continue. It's a bummer, but I don't see any way to get the height needed, and I don't see any way to clip out of bounds to see if there's even anything I could do. Meteor Herd, on the other hand, is totally doable, and like basically every Knuckles stage, I was able to do it pretty quickly. This level actually might be one of the most fun ones to play as Tails due to the fact that it's basically just a massive sandbox with a rocket in the middle, which allows you to get as much height as you'd ever need. Shard 1 was in a spinning meteor, Shard 2 was back on the ground between these two stars, and Shard 3 was also just totally chilling on the ground. It made for a very easy and beatable stage. Now next, I hate to say it, but Crazy Gadget, 100% not doable. Tails can't grab onto any levers that Sonic can, so he can't flip the gravity around, and then he also can't use this pulley to pull himself up. So yeah, nothing you can do. Big time bummer because this is one of my favorite action stages, but Tails is just stuck in this enclosed room with no way to clip out. Final Rush. Oh boy, Final Rush. I want you to try and guess how long I spent on this godforsaken level. I spent over an hour playing this stage. Most of it is actually pretty easily doable. Tails can't grind, but I mean, he can fly, just like I said before, and that's good enough for me. But it's not good enough for the level. You can pretty easily navigate through pretty much all of this level by flying next to the rails. However, Tails' inability to grind will get in the way, as there are multiple positions where you need to grind to move upwards. And yeah, Tails can't do it. He cannot move high enough. So, let me share with you the end result of about 50 minutes worth of trial and error, because after 2 unbeatable levels, I knew that I had to end these action stages on a high note with a victory. This is what you do. You're going to start the same as you normally would by flying alongside the rails. Feel free to stop on this platform and try to better set up your camera, as it's always locked while you're flying. Don't worry too much about losing height, as we actually start off really high up with way more height that's needed, and we're actually going to be stopping on a platform up ahead, so as long as you have enough height for that platform, you're fine. The camera sucks here at the beginning, and honestly, there's nothing that you can do early on to change it. I also really hate these futuristic assets. Everything on this level looks the same. It makes navigating pretty difficult when everything looks identical. But whatever. You're going to want to avoid enemies because you have 0 rings, so try not to die in this run, and eventually you'll come across a platform with a checkpoint on it. You're going to want to hit that checkpoint. You might not think that you need it, you might think that you're good enough to continue this level without hitting it, but this isn't so much for a better safe than sorry scenario, as much as it is for, well, we're going to be killing ourselves right here. The camera is locked in an awful position when we're flying, but after that sweet embrace of death, it actually moves itself to a position that is much better, and it makes the navigation of this nightmare so much more tolerable. From here, it's going to be a lot of blind flying. You can occasionally descend to look down, but honestly, like I mentioned before, everything looks so similar that it's really hard to find your way around. The only real advice that I can give is that you want to follow the rails. They're all pretty brightly lit, and they don't seem to pop out as quickly as everything else, so you can see them pretty much all the time, which is awesome. From here, the game is actually pretty dull. You're going to be periodically looking down to make sure that you're following the rails, and otherwise you're just kind of flying straight. So, I mean, turn something on YouTube and watch something to keep yourself busy, because you're going to be flying for about 5 minutes doing nothing until you finally see this red hallway. You're just going to want to descend onto the hallway, and that's it. You're into the final portion of this stage. Don't worry about any of the falling debris. You can literally stand here and nothing is going to hurt you. And there you go. The goal is in sight. You make it to the ring, and that's it. This level, with a lot of cheese, is totally doable. So all but 3 action stages are actually beatable, which honestly is a lot more than I expected. Now, how might things fare with bosses? Not well, so I'm gonna rapid fire through them. You can't hurt Bigfoot, like at all. I thought maybe I could hit the cockpit with my tails while flying, but nope. This guy may as well just be invincible. Eggman is weird. You can beat him, but I'm not sure if it's because I'm playing as like the Chow Garden Tails. Eggman is not looking like himself. If he touches any rings, the game is going to crash, but you can pretty easily just whack him a bunch before that even happens, which makes him totally and very easily beatable. The same cannot be said for Shadow. I had pretty high hopes with him as his AI is pretty brain dead in this first boss fight, but even standing next to him and attacking does nothing. I thought maybe I could get him to hit my tails while I was flying, but also that does nothing, which unfortunately meant that Shadow is not beatable. King Boom Boo is also impossible. You can get behind him, you can let the sun in, but once he's underground, there's nothing you can do to hurt him. So that's a bummer. The Egg Golem is a bit of a change of a pace. He's the only boss fight that isn't a character that we can beat. We have to watch out a little bit for the sand, as Tails still has an intolerance to suffocation, but otherwise he's pretty easy to beat, and flying honestly makes some of his attacks a complete joke. So thankfully, there's another win in this sea of losses. Following that, we have Rouge, and Rouge's fight is weird. You can hit her, and she goes flying when you hit her, but she loses no health when you hit her. She is not beatable, and she will 100% dominate you. The second Eggman fight might be beatable if you could hit him at the speed of sound. Sadly, I can't. He loves to use his laser cannon once he gets to around half health, and that immediately crashes the game due to his weird ragdoll state that he finds himself in. And finally, it's Shadow again. Good luck even getting close to this guy. Shadow way outspeeds Tails, so he basically just runs as far ahead as he can, and then he spams Chaos Spear on you, which basically automatically hits you. I could not find a way to not get hit by this, making Shadow not only completely unbeatable, but you can't even get close enough to him to hit him. So next to none of the bosses are beatable, and that's a bummer, though I'm pretty impressed at how well Tails did overall. When we last left off, we learned that Tails could actually do a lot of the hero story on his own without a mech. But that begs the question, how much can Tails do in the dark story with no mech? Let's find out. Starting with Iron Gate, we are off to an unpromising start. After making our way down a hall, we are presented with a door, and this door will only open if you shoot 4 targets, which we can't do because Tails doesn't own a gun. As far as I can tell, there's no way out of bounds here either, which means that, yeah, we're stuck. I played around with a canister for a little bit that I thought might do something, but to no avail. Next up is Dry Lagoon, and remember when I said this during Pumpkin Hill? So quick little disclaimer before we start Pumpkin Hill. Pumpkin Hill is the stage where you get the ability to dig as Knuckles, which means that from here on out, emeralds can spawn underground. This would mean that they're impossible for Tails to get. However, every time you die, the emeralds change locations, and so you could just keep killing yourself until you get optimal emerald locations. I have a job and I have university classes to deal with, so I don't have time to murder Tails over and over again, which means that I'm going to be using a mod that basically just prevents emeralds from spawning underground. They still use their typical spawn locations, and so it's essentially just cutting out the middleman of killing Tails. Well, it turns out I'm a big fat liar, because it means a lot more than what I was initially under the impression it did. I totally misinterpreted this vague message that shows up in the mod menu, and it turns out that the mod adds springs for non-treasure hunting characters that make the levels more accessible. This unfortunately means that these levels that I thought were really easy as Knuckles were easy because they were artificially made easier. I don't exactly have the time or energy to double back to Knuckles' stages. I'm sorry, it's exam time right now. I am very busy. So we're just gonna say that Knuckles' mode was baby mode for babies, and with Rouge we will be removing those training wheels and we're gonna really test our treasure hunting prowess. Dry Lagoon is impossible. The game crashes if you touch this stupid turtle, which is needed to progress through the level, and you just cannot get enough height to get any of the emeralds that might even spawn in the main area. So moving on. Sand Ocean was an absolute hoot. I hated traversing the desert in Hidden Base. But Sand Ocean is like the antithesis to that. It's really easy in comparison, and it's basically all done in just one straight line. You more or less just need to start off the level with a bounce off of a balloon that absolutely sends you flying. From there, straight shot into the distance, and you'll make it. I actually almost made it on my first attempt, but I made the fatal flaw of going to say hi to Big the Cat, which left me a little bit too low. And if you remember, Tails actually built an intolerance to suffocation, so he just fell indefinitely into the darkness that lies behind the sand. I had to go through this run again, and honestly, it really wasn't that big of a deal because it's really, really easy. It's very doable, and of course it requires a good deal of cheese to get through it. Next, we have Radical Highway, and it actually wasn't that bad. You can play through a sizable portion of the level pretty normally, though you do need to make use of some boxes to traverse upwards, as Tails still hasn't hit the gym and can't make use of those pulleys. Like with Sonic's City Escape, our real challenge comes in the form of something that we have to roll under, and try as we might, Tails still has not mastered the cartwheel. He also can't get over top of this weird rolling thing, so womp womp. Let's get cheesy then. We can pretty easily fly through the majority of this stage without any real issue. The camera isn't an issue with us, it doesn't fight us throughout this, and actually I found that the camera worked most of the time. Like, I could adjust it on the speed stages, which is something I absolutely couldn't do in any of the hero speed stages. I really enjoyed flying through this level, actually. It's a really good time. I like this kind of early 3D Sonic aesthetic going on. I'm a really big fan of this Got Ring blimp that's just flying around. It gives me like a Sonic meets Batman vibe with the blimp just circling a giant metropolis. I really get a kick out of seeing all these levels from a bird's eye view, and this one definitely takes the cake. But really, other than admiring the sights, it's just flying. You can follow everything pretty easily, and it's a little bit funny considering that the Dark Story was meant to be like the quote-unquote hard mode in this game. But in this weird, unconventional sense, I found actually that the last two levels were way easier than their hero counterparts. Of course, they were never made with the intention of flying through them. Our biggest issue is right here, where everything just kind of despawned for a little bit, but like always, I just had to lower myself, and that was it. Before we close off, there's one last skyline I just really enjoyed and want to show off. Somehow I never noticed this Nights into Dream thing going on here with the big flashing head up top. I thought it looked super pretty to fly by. Like, honestly, the level designers really outdid themselves here. It's a really fun and like visually pleasing level to look at. Finally though, the goal ring is just a hop, skip, and a jump away, making this level beatable with a very hefty amount of cheese and some really nice views to accompany it. Headquarters initially felt pretty promising to me. As I was thinking about it, it's pretty easy to get around, unlike the Knuckles counterpart that kind of necessitates digging through walls. However, as far as I could tell, key number 3 always spawned somewhere just out of reach where I had to dig to get it. It's unfortunate because I could find the first 2 keys no problem, and number 3 just never worked out for me. It got to the point even where I found this Google sheet that just lists out the locations of each treasure item based on the hint that you can get from the TVs, and number 3 would always spawn in an underground location. I do think that maybe you could get lucky enough and actually get it to spawn somewhere else, but I think RNGesus was just against me, or maybe there's something else that I was overlooking. Unfortunately, this one doesn't seem doable. Now, like with Iron Gate, Lost Colony requires us to bust open a door, and we can't do that, so let's go, I guess, and move on. I really enjoyed Weapons Bed. You can tear through these disabled gun mechs just as easily as Eggman can, and overall, it's a super straightforward level that you can follow almost exactly the same way that Eggman does. I did need to fly around certain areas, and I actually weirdly briefly died after skipping Tails' bum over water. I don't know what happened there, but all in all, it's a pretty doable level. You can follow it just as you would Eggman, and interestingly, if we remember from before, pulleys as mech stages absolutely send us flying here. So this pulley that shows up at the end doesn't actually end the run, and instead gives us the exact amount of vertical mobility that we need to continue through the level. Could it actually be that all of the beatable levels here are really easy as Tails? Well, it feels like it. And so with the most minimal amount of cheese, you can get through this level. I'm actually a little bit disappointed that these levels have been going so well, because they're either just outright not doable and I don't have anything to say, or they're so easy that in the same way, I don't have much to talk about. So there isn't really anything of note to discuss here. Everything has been going pretty smooth, or it's just like hitting a brick wall. Speaking of things to say, I have a story for you. This story is about young Sam, who loved to play Sonic Adventure 2. One day, the young, inexperienced Sam made it to Security Hall, and could not beat it. This young version of myself actually quit SA2 because I legitimately could not make it through this timed level. It basically got to the point where I never beat the Dark Story, and it went at least 2 years before I actually got around to playing the game again, and I beat the Dark Story. Surprisingly though, if you're open to ending Tails' life ad nauseum, you can get all of the emeralds that spawn here, no problem. It took me about 16 lives to do this, but I eventually got all 3 emeralds. The first one was found up here, and it was slightly out of reach from where I was, so it required a bit of playing around. All I really had to do was go on these nearby blocks, and then I was able to fly up to the appropriate height. Emerald number 2 is the one that probably gave me the hardest time. Pretty repeatedly, I had the emerald spawn in a safe that I had to dig into, and that was annoying because Tails can't dig into safes. But finally, I had it spawn inside of this big silo thing, and I was a little bit worried that I would have to rub Tails up against it in order to open it, because like we've seen with Knuckles previously, if it's not a box, Omochao can't seem to break it open, and Tails just can't seem to break anything most of the time. However, much to my surprise, Omochao was able to break through this silo, which netted me Emerald number 2 after 25 minutes. And if you're wondering how I managed to stay on a timed mission for 25 minutes, the answer is actually pretty simple. Every time you die in this game, you end up respawning at the last emerald that you collected. So as long as you're not too low on time once you find an emerald, you can pretty much just keep killing yourself before the time runs out and have infinite time to do this. Well, not infinite, as you do need a certain amount of lives in order to accomplish it. Emerald number 3 was thankfully much nicer to me, and 4 minutes later I found it right here. It was just floating in these vents next to all of this money that was flying around. And actually, I never noticed this before, maybe let me know if you did in the comments, but these bills that are flying above the vents actually have Sonic's face on them. It's actually a cool little Easter egg. I never noticed this, and so like 20 plus years later, I'm still learning new things here. But yeah, you can beat this one easy peasy, and much to my shock, it's doable without any cheese, unless you count killing yourself over and over again cheese. White Jungle suffers from the same affliction that Green Forest did, which are the vines that just crash the game the moment they're touched. So from the get-go, there's no real point in trying to play this level the way that God intended it to. Instead, we're just going to be flying across. It's a really open level, so I mean, it should be easy enough to do. However, the camera here was less than a fan of me compared to other stages. It would often get stuck, and so I would just watch Tails get smaller and smaller as he flew off into the distance. One kind of neat thing here that I learned is that the rain actually just follows Tails around in a box, which is a cool little feature because obviously they're not going to make it so it's raining across the whole level and they want to save on resources in this game. I really like that. Otherwise, there isn't much to say here. Tails can fly through this level and can follow it pretty easily. I actually found it easier to follow than Sonic's counterpart level. And really the only thing that was needed to be done here was occasionally I needed to fly closer to the level so that the camera would swing over to where I was. All in all, it wasn't all that hard. I would actually say that the biggest issue that arose was the fact that I was flying a little bit too high and so the goal ring wasn't spawning in, and I just really wasn't sure if the platform below me was the one with the goal ring on it or not, and I didn't want to accidentally get stuck somewhere. But no, that was the goal ring, so end of level, doable, very, very cheesy, but doable. Hey, it's Editing Sam here. Apparently Sky Rail was so forgettable that I just totally forgot to record my lines for that, like, entirely. Sky Rail initially gave me a little bit of PTSD towards the hour that I spent on Final Rush with all of the rails everywhere, but honestly, it's really easy to fly through. Sky Rail is downward descending for the most part, which makes it ridiculously easy. Also, just to add for some fun, I really like the Pumpkin Hill aesthetic over like the space junk that we saw when we were playing through Sonic's level. It's a dull level, but it's like super, super doable, very easy, very mind-numbing. Mad Space is an interesting one. It's always felt a little bit like Mario Galaxy to me, which is fun because Mario Galaxy is fun and I like these weird gravity shenanigans that go on with the little planetoids all over the place. But sadly, we don't get to experience any of that as Tails. There are rockets here that can send you to different areas, but in order to get the rockets, you need to hit a switch that is underneath a box that requires the ability to break these thick metal boxes. However, Tails can't even break a wooden box, so those are all locked off to us. To make matters even worse, if we were to check out the one planet that we can travel to, well, Tails struggles a great deal there. He wasn't made for this weird gravity thing that goes on, and the closer you get to like the equator of this planetoid, the weirder things get with Tails, and it gets harder and harder to actually properly control him on the planet. Another really weird thing here is that if you hit a spring and you try to fly, because I thought maybe I could use that to get away from the planet, Tails still gets pulled right back down to the planet, even when flying, and this is the only stage where that has ever happened to me. Unfortunately, due to this, I've got to say that I really don't think that this stage is beatable at all. I was curious if the low gravity of Cosmic Wall would transfer over to Tails like it does with Eggman, and I think it does. Honestly, it's a little bit hard to tell. I'm pretty sure Tails is jumping higher than usual, but it's hard. He doesn't make it high enough to bridge this first jump that he needs to do, unfortunately. And this level is designed with the idea that you would play as Eggman and fly your way up, something that Tails can't do without his mech. So unfortunately, looks like there's nothing we can do. I tried to fly up ahead to even see if maybe there was something I could fly to, but there's death zones all over the place, which means that this level just is not doable. But to break this bad luck streak is Final Chase. I mean, if I could beat Final Rush, there was no reason I couldn't beat the Shadow counterpart. And yeah, for the most part, Final Chase is actually way easier than Final Rush was. If you watched my SA2 retrospective, you'll know that Final Chase is actually my favorite stage in the game, and that's due in large part to these spinny cylinder things, and they actually work totally fine with Tails. This made traversing the level and gaining the height that we need to cheese the level super easy. There was one moment in my first attempt where I accidentally got stuck because I was following the level a little bit too closely and I ended up in front of this rail that goes straight upwards and Tails couldn't use it. I tried to follow it up, but basically what happened about every time is that I would just fall back down the same tunnel I went up. So unfortunately, that was a little roadblock, but it more or less just meant that I had to restart the level and fly my way through the level, which I was able to do with relative ease. And so after flying into this weird light show of a room, I hit a spring, and before I knew it, I made it to the goal ring that was very covered in cheese. So, like the hero story, I'm going to rapid fire through the bosses, because much like the hero story, they're disappointing. I'm sorry. Hotshot can't be hurt. I tried flying into him, it does nothing. I really can't figure out anything for Hotshot or Bigfoot or Flying Dog, so they're just not doable. Tails was actually really interesting for a couple of reasons. So the first is that unlike Eggman, he isn't doing this weird ragdoll thing. He actually functions perfectly normally. However, kind of weirdly is you spawn right between his legs. So get ready to attack right away lest you want to die. And other than that, we get a full-on Tails mech fight. The only thing here is that we need to do the mech fight without getting hit. Because if we get hit while holding a ring, the game doesn't seem to know what to do. Basically, it just ends up freezing in place and you can't move, you can't attack, and you can't take damage. So you get this not at all fun scenario where the other Tails just stands on top of you and screams at you. It wasn't a big deal. The biggest issue really was that I was stressed that he would hit me, but once you get the hang of it and you get an idea of how often Tails can attack and how close you can get, he's pretty beatable. Flying Dog is just Hotshot without legs, and Hotshot is just Bigfoot with a different name, so just like all the other ones, it's not doable. Sonic, like Shadow in the hero story, can't be hurt, which means he's unfortunately not beatable. The egg golem is different in the Dark Story compared to the hero part, and it requires you to shoot his nipples as Eggman. Tails still doesn't own a gun, so he can't hurt him. And weirdly, touching the pulleys on the bottom of the stage actually freezes Tails in place. The game doesn't freeze, but Tails does. You can't move him or do anything once you touch the pulleys. Knuckles, like Sonic, like Shadow, and like Rouge, can't be hurt by Tails, which means that he'll beat you way before you'll be able to do any damage to him. Tails' number 2 fight is totally beatable, and it's actually pretty easy to do. He'll start using his really big cannon once he gets to about half health, and it's like insanely easy to avoid because you're so small, and whenever he uses it, it just opens him up to being hit because he ends up locked in place while doing this attack. He's totally beatable, and unlike Eggman, he actually felt like a real boss, so that was fun. Then we have Sonic. You can't catch up to him. He's a bully who's going to hit you with these tornadoes repeatedly, and honestly, even if you could reach him, we still can't hurt him, so that's disappointing. Yeah, the Dark story for sure has impossible levels, just like the Hero story, and we didn't see anything new with the bosses, but surprisingly, it all went a lot smoother than the Hero story did, and I think that's actually really interesting. Most of the stages were really easy to do, and they required very little attention from me compared to the Hero stories. For the most part, I just ended up watching YouTube while flying in a straight line for all of the levels that I beat. So what about the final stage that you unlock after beating Hero and Dark? How beatable is it? And I mean, listen, I'm including it in this video, so it can't be that beatable, but you'll be surprised as to what is and isn't beatable. Cannon's core is not doable. The stage starts with a mech segment and it necessitates blowing open a door. Bummer. I thought that this would end up ending on a low note, as the next part to this is a boss fight against the Biolizard, and quite frankly, that sounded impossible to me. And for the longest time, I thought it was. Until I was kind of running around this weird lizard that was flopping around the floor trying to hit me, and I got bonked off of his foot. And I don't mean that I hit his foot and took damage. I mean that I hit his foot when I had no rings, and instead of dying, this weird blue shield showed up, and I got bonked away from it. This is really interesting because I never saw this happen anywhere else. So I thought maybe this side of the Biolizard is padded so that when you're playing as Shadow, you can't get cheaply hit if you were knocked into the water. And like, maybe some parts of it are. It's weird. There were definitely times where I hit him on the side and I managed to bounce, but it seemed like the majority of the time I would still just end up taking damage. What was interesting though was his neck. You can pretty consistently bounce off of the majority of his neck, although I ended up aiming for the same spots as there are some weird areas where you'll take damage. I assume that this is here so that when you're playing as Shadow, if you were to accidentally overshoot a jump and miss the rail, you wouldn't feel like you unjustly took damage from him, but honestly, I have no idea why this boss has so much random invisible padding around him. So here's what you have to do, and here's something that took me 33 attempts to do. You have to bonk off of his neck twice, which will typically, but not always, but typically get you just enough height to hit his weak spot on his back. The thing is, you cannot touch this weak spot. If you do, you end up taking damage, so we can't land on it and spin our tail onto him. Instead, we have to make sure that we are the exact right height to fly into him and hit him with our tail. This is super freaking finicky. It's really annoying. So the first hit that you'll do after bonking off of his neck twice almost always lines you up perfectly with it. However, after that, you get knocked up into the air, and basically what I ended up doing is I would very quickly release and press the A button, typically around 6 times, although sometimes it took me more and sometimes it took me less. It's pretty inconsistent, mostly because I'm probably not doing it at the exact same amount of time each time I let go and press the button. And on top of that, one thing I noticed is that Tails actually continues to lose a little bit of height after you depress and repress a button. So more or less what you want to do is depress the button and then press it really quick and then just kind of circle around the weak spot to see if Tails might lower to that just sweet spot where he'll actually deal damage. And the thing is, you don't want to get hit at all here, because weirdly, these padded spots on the Biolizard's neck seem to kind of disappear, sort of. I mean, they're there, and there have been moments where I screwed up and I had to land, and I was able to kind of bounce my way back up. However, they seem to be smaller or in different spots. I could not do it as consistently as I could the first time around. So more or less, if I got hit once, I would just restart the run. Also, at around the halfway point of his health, he starts to do this attack where he kind of sticks up his neck in the air and a whole bunch of these pink balls show up, and then there's no real padding to hit to be able to get to his back. So basically, what you have to do is continuously hit him at that exact perfect sweet spot height without touching the ground so that he doesn't do this thing where he lifts up his neck in the air. And it's way harder than it sounds to do. It took me some time. Like I said, it took me 33 attempts, but it was doable. And then finally, once he's on his last hit, he does this thing where he knocks everything up in the air, and there's a whole bunch of pink balls, and you just have to do your best to avoid them. I made it to this spot like 2 or 3 times beforehand, and I almost always got sniped by one of the balls, and I would just end up dying. I found that the best thing to do is to just go at it headstrong and like really make a beeline towards that weak spot. It was stressful, but I managed to do it, and I am so proud watching like the footage of Tails flying and just threading the needle. I was so shocked that I took 0 damage on this run. Like, I would try to make it to the end here with a ring so that if I got hit, I could at least damage boost through the balls, but I didn't even need it. I made it through it, and so the Biolizard is 100% doable. It's shocking to me that there is an actual boss in this game that you can beat that isn't Eggman or Tails. Like, wild. So, all that to say, I'm very happy with this challenge. I had a ton of fun with it. I hope that you enjoyed watching me play through it in both the Hero and Dark stages. There were a few stages that I just couldn't do, like the ones where you're driving or Supersonic and Super Shadow, because you're just locked as a character on those stages, and even the character select mod doesn't do anything for them. Anyways, if you enjoyed it, let me know. If you really enjoyed it, a like, a subscribe, a comment, all of that really goes a long way. It really means a lot to me. At the end of the day, though, I can't tell you what to do. I just hope that you have a good one.